Hi, Jeremy. Welcome to Fresh Books. Thanks for joining us here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I'm excited to be on the call and chatting with your group.
And you're in good company. We spoke with Marty Newmeyer last month around his book Scramble, which was really interesting. And next month, in fact, it's just 3 weeks away. On the 21st of November, we're talking with Maria Ross, who I think you know.
Yes, her new book just came out.
Yeah, that's it. So you guys are busy. It looks like you've been really busy out there. How's it going so far?
It's been a ton of fun. The book publishing, book marketing world is probably the biggest grind you can ever ask for. But the thing that I'm having so much fun is just having people resonate with the book and saying it's valuable. We had a launch event at the University of Toronto a couple of weeks ago, and it was the second highest attended event of the year. The highest attendance was Malcolm Gladwell, so I've got my work cut out to catch up to him. But it's fun, and I think the neat thing about book marketing and bringing a book to the world is it's packaging and sharing ideas and seeing if they spread. And that's really the journey that I'm on right now.
Cool. And we've read it, the guys on the call here. So we've got a bit of an insight. You give a little bit of the backstory, and you've packaged up some great ideas, and there's a lot of themes in there that we'll maybe get a chance to talk about, creativity in general, and anything creative. There's got to be a germ somewhere, a little seed. And so where did that come from for brand new name? Why? What's the driver?
Well, the origin of this actually came out of frustration. If you think of everyone on the call right now, we all come from a brand strategy world. We work with clients and advise them on how to do naming, to do strategy, to do other elements, and that's the kind of practice that I've been running for many years. And after the launch of my first book, Sticky Branding, I did a series of articles that were just these ultra long articles. I wanted to see how they would perform online. And one of them was on brand naming. And the phone started ringing with all these naming inquiries. And at first I just started turning them away. I'm like, I don't do this, and just moved on. But after probably 10 or so, the sales guy in me starts kicking and going, what's going on here? And so I approach naming very much from the traditional perspective of take on a project, work the process, create names, help the client make a decision, and get through it. The problem with that is that's really time consuming, especially from an agency perspective. And so I hit a ceiling of complexity right away. And so at that point in time, an investor approached me, that a family foundation that invests in marketing agencies. And they said, we love what you're doing in naming. We see huge market potential. The name is the starting point for every brand. And if we can get in on the ground floor with a naming project, then we can sell them a whole boat ton of additional services. Cool. And so we go through that. Long story short, we couldn't get the pricing or their costs down into a reasonable market rate. And so stuck with all this demand coming in, I started asking the question, how else can we go around solving this naming challenge? And in a whiteboarding session, I just wrote on the board, unlock the creative genius of employees. And that was a watershed moment, not only for the development of the brand new name methodology, but my entire work towards working with clients and being a consultant. And that is what I have come to truly believe, and I can back it up by research, and it's talked about in the book, is you are creative. Your team is a creative, and inside every organization is immense creative potential. And if we can provide structure and process to employees, we can solve incredibly complex problems like naming. And we can actually get to better outcomes than we might achieve through hiring external advisors, because not only are your employees creative, they know the business, they're passionate about the business. And if we can harness that, then it really becomes an opportunity to do something exponential. And so that's been a big driver for me, is how do we provide process around employee co-creation to solve some of the most complex branding problems that we face every day.
That's nicely put. Now, if I was being cynical or questioning that, you could say, wait a minute, as a consultant, because I know that you're not just an author, you've explained you've got a live consulting business. Are you not going to put yourself out of business by this book, because you've done such a great job of packaging up that process and the systems?
Well, I'll cover that question on two sides of things. So the first thing I said is that this process has been a watershed moment for me. So up until that moment, I had run a traditional consulting practice, which was largely prescriptive. As a consultant, we facilitate, or at least I did, we would facilitate strategy meetings, do analysis, and take the client through a positioning exercise or whatever the outcomes that we were driving for. And I'd always have that problem when you call up a client a year later and say, so how's it going? How are you going on the strategy? And nothing moves. And so what I discovered just doing the naming projects around using employee co-creation is, if you take that to almost any aspect of your work, you can actually get to better outcomes, because all of a sudden employees start to own the process. So when Sticky Branding runs, say, a strategy program, part of what my methodology looks at is we create quests. So take a very simple example. Think of buyer personas. It's like naming. It's a defined process. Well, if we can put the process together and assign it to internal people, now they start to master the skills and have better understanding of their business. And so I think we can get to better outcomes through this philosophy, and we can empower teams to actually implement and grow their brands from the inside out. And will that displace me as a service provider? Maybe, but I don't really think so. I think part of this gets unwieldy, that you need process. You often need tools. So in order to help people do a job they've never done before, we have to change our mindset as consultants on how to do that.
Yeah, no, I am with you on that, and I like that, the inside out. It makes me think of Denise Leon. I think
Fusion.
Denise, exactly. So, and she's really strong on culture, isn't she? And talking about, right, well, let's not just make this an external brand, which looks lovely, but it's not actually what you guys are really living. So I guess what you're talking about is, when you're trying to draw on the internal creativity, which I totally get with you, I'm with you on that. So you're trying to take the strength, but that culture's then got to be creative as well, doesn't it, to deliver this?
Not necessarily. Like, if you think of it, most people are busy doing their jobs. I'll give you an example from a naming project. So the way the brand new name works is it's a 3-stage process. Stage 1, build your strategy. Stage 2, a 5-day naming sprint. Stage 3, test and select. Now, in the 5-day naming sprint, what we do is we challenge the team to say, can you generate 5 good names per day per person? So I did a project recently with a software startup that had a trademark issue. They couldn't enter the United States market because the name they were operating under was already taken. Well, we took the 45 employees, and over the course of 5 days, they generated 639 names. Out of that, 40 of them were viable candidates. 10 we tested, 5 we market tested, and they actually chose 2 of them. One was for the company name and one for a product name. And what I found interesting on this was the names didn't come from marketing. They didn't even come from leadership. A software engineer who barely speaks English, he's a Chinese national, came up with the product name, and it was incredible. Fortunately, I can't share the names with you right now because they're still going through the trademarking process. But what I think the mistake that we make is we assume, because somebody's an accountant, because someone's a software developer, because someone's doing a traditionally non-creative job, they're not creative. But most of us are working for something else. We go to work and we have a skill and expertise, but you can have someone who's a Baptist singer or a painter or a poet or something else that they just haven't been asked to participate in a project like this. And by simply giving the tools and process, you never know where great ideas are going to come from.
No, that's a great example of using the power of the team to actually co-create this. And I mean, what I like as well is that this stretches, doesn't it, out of naming, into brand and into wider business strategy to say, well, talk to your workforce and use the power of the workforce.
And that starts to build off of Denise Leon and Fusion, because now, for the first time ever, you may be asking employees to participate in the development of brand. And so, or you might be asking people that are in the belly of the beast, working in customer service or shipping or logistics or whatever it is, like normal average employees are getting involved in strategic projects. And that creates ownership, and that also creates understanding. So people start to understand, why is this business doing what this business does? And that's a powerful culture building tool, especially when you're dealing with a younger workforce. A millennial workforce absolutely wants to have a stake in the business. So give it to them.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of that, and I don't want to simplify by saying it's generational, but in terms of purpose, real those drivers, as you say, what gets people to work in the morning. We're having to understand that a little bit more, aren't we now?
For sure.
You touched on things. You spoke about some of your live clients, and what I loved about this is, you set out the philosophy and the strategy, and it's very practical. As you say, you lay out exactly what you have to do day by day. But then you were able to show that you're a real practitioner, and you brought some examples to the table. One of them was your family business, original business. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of your experience there?
Sure. Well, I don't have a traditional entry into the branding world. I didn't start in advertising. I was a sales guy. That was my career. I actually started in the CRM software industry in the early 2000s, and I joined my family business in 2004 as a director of sales and marketing. And largely, it was a director of sales. It was an IT staffing company. And I didn't know it at the time, but we were going through the early stage of a technological disruption. Google was 5 years old. Facebook was less than a year old. LinkedIn was 3 years old. And it was transforming how job seekers were going to market, how clients were hiring agencies. But we felt it as a sales problem. It was getting harder and harder to generate business and grow the company. And after an incredibly painful first year, I remember sitting down with both of my parents and saying, if this is what it's like to be in a family business, I can't keep going. I might as well go back to the software industry. This is awful. And this is probably when I got the best advice of my career. And it's in the book, and it probably flies under the radar, but it truly is something that means the world to me. And so my dad basically said to me, it's not about the business we've built. It's about the business we're building. What are we going to build next? And so that gave me permission to look differently at my work as a sales leader. And I took a step back and I started to study the business, study the market, study our customers. And what I noticed was, because of that digital disruption, people were going online and evaluating us based on our website. We were actually breaking the relationship chain that we had established for 15 years. And what we saw was, we looked no different than a law firm or an accounting firm, and our customers couldn't distinguish us from anyone else. And that was the moment goes, oh crap, we have a branding problem, not a sales problem. But I'm a sales guy. I don't know anything about this. So the first thing I do is I just start reading everything I can get my hands on. Marty Neumeyer, David Ocker, Al Reese, name the book, I've probably read it or probably did at that time. The problem was, all of those guys talked about big companies. I was a small business. I had a marketing budget, but not a vast one. And I was dealing with digital disruption issues. And again, they weren't talking about that. And so we had to adapt and try and put all that process into place. We adopted digital marketing in terms of, it was before it was even called inbound marketing. We were looking at through Seth Godin's lens of permission marketing. So using content, social media, and other pieces to feed us. And what happened was my clients took notice. So Yellow Pages and Granger and these large international organizations started saying, "Hey, what are you doing over there on digital?" And we would explain. They said, "Can you help us?" And so my first foray into branding was actually creating demand generation departments for large corporations. And as I kept working the sales problem, trying to solve the problem of how do you feel the sales force, I had progressed into brand. And so when I sold my family's business in 2013, where sticky branding came from was, what's the book I wish I had when I went through that transition? And I took my experience and then I profiled and I analyzed over 150 mid-market companies from New Zealand to the United States to understand essentially challenger brands, what Adam Morgan talks about, but understand it from my lens of how does a privately held mid-market company challenge the giants of their industry and grow their business and brand. And that's been that continual lens and evolution. And so my work hasn't come from an academic or a corporate perspective. It's barely come from an entrepreneurial perspective of how do I create a sustainable competitive advantage using marketing? And that's been the core ethos of sticky branding.
That's great. And that's a challenge. It's something that I'm really strong about, and what we try and do at Fresh is explain that these techniques that big businesses use, it's not just the domain of big business. Often you're talking to smaller businesses who, exactly as you put it, have a branding challenge, but they don't realize it. Yeah. And when you start to explain that that's actually what they need to get out of the situation they're in, they think, oh no, that's for Starbucks or Amazon or whoever it is. So that's really nicely put, and really interesting story just to find out how you got there. And I liked how you show that you've actually taken your own medicine, not only in the family business, but actually then naming the book. So not too many spoiler alerts for those that haven't actually read the book. That was really neat. And I also really like the Haagen-Dazs story. It's got to sound foreign.
It's total gibberish.
Yeah. What's your favorite in those, like in terms of origin story, Jeremy?
I think I have several favorites, but I think Bluetooth is the one that really stands out for me as a cool origin story. I'll rehash it quickly. But Bluetooth is named after a medieval Norwegian king, Harald Blatten, and in ancient Norwegian, Blatten meant blue tooth. Legend has it, he had a dead tooth that had turned blue-black, and he was famous for conquering basically Scandinavia without violence. And so when the giants of the tech industry, Intel, IBM, Nokia, Ericsson, were coming together to create a standard protocol for our devices to talk to each other, they use that as a metaphor. Now, the reason I find the story fascinating is it's a cool origin story, but it plays to the some of the funny elements of marketing. The assumption was this was a code name, and the marketing team would come up with a better name, except for the marketing team came up with PAN for personal area network. And we're all of the generation where we probably know the techie stuff. You had LANs for local area networks and WANs for wide area networks. So PAN probably made logical sense at that moment in time. But fortunately, the lawyers went, no, that's not going to work. And running out of time, they chose that whimsical code name. And I always find that interesting that sometimes the most interesting names aren't the ones that are the functional names that you would expect. Like another story, just another brand that I think I love, or that I love, is Big Ass Fans. They started as HVLS fan company for high volume, low speed fan company. And big 9-foot diameter fans put up in industrial parks. And but the customers kept calling up and say, "Hey, you those guys that sell those big ass fans?" And after a few times, the management team leaned into it. And so it's those moments where people step out of the logical, practical, what's the descriptive, proper way to describe this brand, and they actually go with their gut or their heart, that we start to create those really memorable, interesting moments.
Yeah, I like those. I like those too, and it's quite funny at times. The book, I'm sure you'll take that as positive feedback, and there's some great stories, and just in those stories themselves, there's a bit of emotion, isn't there, and humour and stuff. Rather than you're right, the marketing team, that was a pretty clinical name that they were going to use rather than Bluetooth.
Yeah.
So I'll get technical with you for a minute if I could. You've kind of developed a blueprint and a process, and you've got like 3 categories of names: descriptive, suggestive, and abstract. If I got that.
Yep.
And I guess there's not a best, is there, or is it case by case?
I think this goes back to that marketing thinks we should have one type of name. We should have a descriptive name. It should tell people what we do, or it should be an abstract name. It should not mean anything, and we'll breathe life into it. And where one of the greatest mistakes I see in naming projects is lack of strategy. That's that thought of, I'll know it when I see it. So the reason why that chapter, The Anatomy of the Name, exists is to hopefully spark a different lens for a team that's naming something. Usually we all suffer from a halo effect. So if everyone in your industry uses acronyms, we're probably going to have a propensity to look at acronyms. And if everyone is using evocative phrases like Apple or Caterpillar, then we're going to set that up as our standard. And the interesting thing is, you can have fascinating names in any space. I actually love acronyms. I think they're some of the more intriguing names. They get a bad rap because someone's like, how is IBM a great name? But most of the time when we use an acronym, we turn it into we say it phonetically, like AFLAC or SCUBA. I work with an NGO that is the Canadian Organizational Development or Economic Development, something like that. But CODE is the acronym. But everyone calls it CODE. It's known internationally as CODE. Now, the name, the acronym CODE is problematic because it becomes associated with technology and software coding. But it's just a simple thing that people took the acronym and then just started saying it. So I think that to answer your question, Finley, I think the key is, when creating a name, try to explore all 3 categories and all the ways to construct names and generate as many ideas under each, because it's going to be the thing that we have. The reason that it's a 5-day naming sprint is the first round of ideas that we do. So if you were to do a half-a-day workshop to generate a name, all you're essentially doing is saying the names and ideas you already know. It's not until you've exhausted your creativity and then actually have to start creating, that's the moment that we have to get through. So part of what we're doing in the strategy is burning through people so that they can generate net new ideas.
Okay, no, that's cool. Thanks. And coming back to the humans a little bit, because I've experienced this problem working in smallish teams when the founders are still really close to the action. And we do a workshop around essence, and I'll maybe have an initial meeting with founders and directors, and then say, right, okay, we're going to go and talk to the team now. And there's sometimes a bit of a clash there. Have you experienced, or are you hearing feedback on any issues like that around using the whole team when because what you're talking about is you're trying to get as many ideas on the table as possible?
Yeah, attitudinally that can come out of the gate. And I think it's a leadership challenge that someone has to believe that their organization has creative talent. And if they don't, I don't think they should do this process at all. If you don't have faith in your employees, probably should question yourself as a leader. But if that's really the case, you're not going to trust them enough to participate in it. So there's that desire that I believe my team is really great. They have potential. Let's give them a chance. Why the process works, though, is it also has a degree of structure to it. Because if you were to bring that team into the boardroom and say, all right, guys, time to be creative, chances are you're going to pull up no ideas. That's why I'm not a big fan of using naming workshops. They tend to put people on the spot and not generate the results you want. So my approach to this is on the idea of working alone together. Give somebody a creative challenge, give them some guidance, give them a quota, and then let them do it on their own time using their own process. And if you can do that, especially from a leadership perspective, maybe somebody's creative in the morning, maybe it's in the evening, maybe it's over lunchtime, maybe it's chatting with someone, I'm not sure, but give them the opportunity to do it on their own under their own terms. And because that's the moment I think they'll surprise you is if you ask them to do it on demand, probably not going to work great. But what I have seen every single time I've run a naming sprint is the team generates more ideas and better ideas than anything they would have got externally.
Yeah, no, that's nice. And I also liked that as part of that, you advise the decider is bought in and engaged right up front as well.
Yeah, I learned that from Jake Knapp in the sprint methodology, and Jake was so kind to blurb the book as well, because a lot of this is inspired by him. But he basically says if you're going to be running a project of this scale and importance, the boss got to be there, and the boss has to be involved. You can't delegate it, and so I am very adamant if I'm running the sprint that if the CEO doesn't have to be fully contributing ideas every day, but if they're not involved start to finish, it's not going to work. So the boss has to be there.
Yeah, and we've all seen that in different ways. If we're maybe not talking to the decision maker right up front, maybe in the sales environment or whatever it is. So that's good advice. So, well, let's jump forward a little bit now. And so the project, the business, they've got their name. And I've mentioned how this can be used in other areas of strategy. Where did they go from that point?
Isn't this the coolest part of what we get to do, though? The name is the starting point of every brand. It's the very first moment. I'll give you. I'm regretting this before I say it out loud. But the investors that were interested in working with me called naming the ovulation cycle of branding. It's like, oh, that's so gross. But it's true. It's that starting point of where things happen. So the moment you have a name, it feels awkward. There's something there. You feel it. Your team feels it. You get it. But nobody else gets it yet. It's just a set of characters. And now is the moment you get to breathe life into it. And it's the starting point of your brand, or it could be the restart if you're renaming something. And so the thing that I think is so key after you have a name is you start to look at the brand strategy, the communication strategy, the positioning strategy. It's how are you going to deliberately breathe life into this thing and you've just spent all this time and effort creating it. How are you going to make it into the most valuable brand asset in your organization? Because I fundamentally believe that names are the most valuable assets in any organization. David Ocker said it, names are more valuable than trademarks and patents. That we know Kodak or Velcro or Kleenex, and they are category defining names. And even if they were to lose the trademark, the brand is still trapped in our head. So that's really the core work of branding. And that comes back to all the work that every one of us do, which is how do we create sustainable competitive advantage that delights our customers so that each of those experiences are inserted into this vessel that we call a name. And that becomes the reference by which we know, like, and trust the brand that we want to build.
Cool, brilliant. Yeah, I like it. It's the birth of the brand and so on. We could play about with that analogy if we really wanted to. For you, how about you? Before we maybe open it up to see if anyone else has got any questions or points, what's next for you then?
I got to sell a lot of books to pay for this thing, so this isn't a cheap world. My big driver right now is two things. One is to really get Brand New Name into the world. My hope for it is to grow it into that category defining book that it's not going to displace agencies, but at least it's that starting point that really elevates the topic of naming. It drives me nuts that there's only 2 books on naming on Amazon, and this is such a cornerstone topic. So really raising the category and the topic is my number one priority. The other is just the continued evolution of our industry and practice. Part of what drives me at Brand New Name, or sorry, Sticky Branding, and with the work with Brand New Name and other work I do, is how do we take these strategic, important topics that we wrestle with every single day and make it accessible to all businesses and all business owners, that it's not some academic or some agency type of thought. It's something that we all believe that our brand is the ultimate sales machine, and to create a strong brand and to do that and showing people how to do that is really what drives my mission. I'll give you a quick analogy. There's an old meme that went around the internet a few years ago called "How to Draw an Owl," and it's a fun and simple guide to draw an owl in 2 steps. Step 1, draw 2 circles, one for the head and one for the body. Step 2, draw the rest of the damn owl. And you just think, this is the challenge I see with so much of the work in branding. We tell people these big ideas of what great brands should be. We show up Starbucks, we show up Nike and these organizations. But I think the ultimate work right now for all of us is showing people the how. How do we actually get from A to B? Everyone forgets Starbucks was a startup. And if you look at their brand back in the 80s, it was all over the place. The logos were changing, the store designs were changing. It wasn't this polished, perfect thing. And that's the world that most of us live in. Is we're not McDonald's or Starbucks. We are companies that are fighting and challenging conventions to find our own way. And that's the work of branding. I think a brand is based on what you've done. Branding is what you're going to do next. And so if you're strategic and deliberate on that, then you're going to create those positive experiences that create a brand.
That's great. Thanks. You've got a purpose and a mission as well, and that's coming across in the work that you do, but also in this conversation. So I really appreciate that. We're with you, and we'll evangelize about your work, about Brand New Name, and we're going to support you in that going forward. And would love to have you across in Scotland sometime.
Name the day.
Have you in Glasgow, and we'll work on that. We'll connect and try and see find a way to do that somehow. That would be really exciting. I wonder if anyone else has got a question or a point they want to put to Jeremy just now. What we will do is we're going to post this video, put it up into the FreshBooks group on LinkedIn, and engage with people that way. Jeremy, I hope you can share that with us as well, to pull in some of your wider community. I'm part of the Sticky Branding group on LinkedIn. That's a great community, and if anyone else isn't a member of that, I'd advise you go over and join that as well. Like-minded people sharing some great ideas.
Thank you.
And just a little reminder that we're back in just over 3 weeks' time with Maria Ross. So we're going to have to get our skates on, get a copy of The Empathy Edge. Oh, hey, you're ahead of the game.
I already got my advanced copy. It's great. It's an interesting book.
And so that's what we're going to be reading and discussing that with Maria Ross in 3 weeks' time. So if no one wants to put a question to Jeremy just now, we'll maybe pick it up. And Jeremy, if you can maybe just come into that conversation, that would be really appreciated. And so it's just for me to say thank you very much. Thanks for coming on to Fresh Books.
John's got a question.
There's John's got an idea. Sorry, just before we go. Yeah,
fire on the floor.
I have also. This is a really tactical one.
Sure.
And I enjoyed your book very much. So,
Thank you.
And I'm a firm believer that you do want employee engagement in the naming process. A lot of times for me, times that companies I've been on that we've been pulled in as an outside consultant, they didn't have problems generating names. They had problems making a decision which name was going to be best and why it was going to be best and not having groupthink around it. So I liked the process that you put towards that. The tactical question was, in your naming sprint, or at least the way that I read it, everyone has a quota. It's a definite sales process, which is great. You know, it's like have a number of names that you're going towards, and then you're picking from that quota down to 5 names that you're generating in. Does somebody, like if I generated 50 names, you'd only be asking me to submit what I considered to be 5 good names? Because it seems like you might be filtering out. I might say that's not a great name, and you might look at that and say, that's it. That's something that should be elevated.
So to answer your question, no. If you generated 50 good names in a day, submit the 50 good names.
Okay.
And so oftentimes when I facilitate these sprints, the client will start with a pre-batch list of names. They've generated 100 or something odd names. So we throw that in the mix. And so the quota really is to force people to try and get beyond just putting in a random word, because most of the time getting to 5 is going to take them an hour or so. But if you got an uber creative person, they got 50, then by all means do that. The chances are by the time they hit 30, they're going to be struggling to get to their 5. So we see that both dynamics, but absolutely empower them to do that. Create a tool. We've had to build software from the facilitation perspective. The book itself, everything you need to do is great. On your own 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, it's perfectly fine. It gets unwieldy if you've got 50 people submitting names and then you've got Excel spreadsheets and everything. So we've built, we run an automated email distribution for the naming exercises and a database for the submissions. But the key to the whole thing is whether you do it manually or through with the tools, it's when those names come in that first day or the second day, is to reshare them with the group, because we are building on everybody else's ideas. And I think that's really where serendipity starts to kick in, where if someone generated 50 names and everyone else did their quota, well, now we've got, let's say, 100 names off of day 1, and people will scan that and go, oh, that's where I'm going to go on day 2. And they actually start to build on it. So the more people contribute, the more volume you get down. Then when you go to testing, that's really what's going to be key, because if you're only testing 4 names and they're all kind of crappy, that's really demoralizing.
Right. And then that was great. Thank you. I had a second question, which was, I love the Bluetooth example. And sometimes that name is sitting within, and it's already been there. But how do you overcome internal name bias? So I've seen a lot of times where a group already had a code name, the project's been in development for a certain amount of time, and they have fallen in love with the code name. And the code name may or may not be available. It may or may not be right for the actual target audience that the product or the company is being named for.
Yeah.
But how do you overcome that bias if it's being generated internally, if people are so either latched on or they think of the code name as the name of the product? You know, how do you overcome that bias?
Great question, John. I come across this frequently. It's usually why the trigger event to someone saying, okay, this is why we need to run an outside naming sprint. So the thing that happens is exposure bias, that the more you work with a name, the more you like it. Right. And that's positive. That's why we look at names like Nike or Uber and go, wow, they're such great names. And really, are they? No, but you heard them a billion times. So now you think they're awesome. And the companies are awesome. So that supports that. So the exposure bias issue. First things first, if they love it, then why are they not able to choose it? Most likely they can't get the domain, they can't get the trademark, or they can't get, there's a competitive issue. If that's the case, then the way I handle that is let's have a funeral for this name. Like, we need to put this thing to bed. Let's put a nice gravestone to it and get rid of it, because you can't have it. And I did a project with a blockchain identity. They love that name. They still love that name. They're still talking about the name they created, but they can't use it anywhere. So get over it. The other issue, though, is the harder one is they love the name, but it's not great for the market.
Right.
And in that case, that's really where you have to get analytical. You have to say, okay, I have the name score in the book and the market testing, but it's really to facilitate common conversation, to have a discussion, to say, we love this name, but it has these functional flaws. What will this mean for the brand 5 years from now? And that's tying you back to strategy. If you can say to yourself, this name is going to be a problem, we love it, but it's going to be a problem, then you have to ask the question, is this the thing we need to breathe life into? And that really has got to go back to the decider to say, look, Bob, look, Jim, look, whatever your name is, are you sure? If you are sure, then we'll back you on this. But if it's a mistake, better to get it right now. Ultimately, people are going to do with their business.
Well, that's interesting, because actually that comes back to your WD-40 example from memory, because I only finished your book on Monday. But there's so much good content in here, it's hard to pick out specific pieces, because obviously you mentioned the name score, and that's kind of something I want to flag about how successful I can see that working with a lot of the stuff I work on, because that again brings you back to that kind of, is it personable, is it relatable, is it identifiable, is it different enough? And I think just there's so much good content in here, and I've actually ordered your book Sticky Branding because I like the way you write as well. I think it's quite easy to follow. It's got good guides in there as well, and I'm excited
Thank you.
for the next book.
Thank you. I'm scared of writing my next book, but I'm happy for you to read the previous stuff. But thank you. It's I think that it gets back to that how to draw a damn owl thing. It's process is everything in branding and marketing, and that I think we get caught up on these big idea concepts and these aspirational elements, but I think a brand is very much a strategy, and strategy is process. It's in order to be creative, in order to get to compelling outcomes, you've got to have better ideas. I spoke at an event a few weeks ago, and I met this very rich investor who's like meeting a Warren Buffett kind of profile, and he shared with me his three criteria for success. He said, in order for someone to be successful, they have to be purpose-driven, they have to have creative solutions, and they have to have resilience. And he said the key though was creative solutions. Lots of people that work really hard and get to know great outcomes. So how do we go around that process to get there? And so if we're able to take our clients and give them that process and creative solutions that support their goals, and they help.
Thanks. I'm not sure if it was just at my end there, but my audio was playing up a little bit there, so apologies if that's some technical issue on the call. Okay. Just to come back to what Chris made the point there, isn't that beautiful, Jeremy? If people, the first point of contact is brand new name, and then they go into your back catalogue and go and pick up Sticky Branding as well. And I think that'll happen. I definitely do, and so putting that on people's reading list. So there's an idea. Maybe sometime next year, maybe we could run another call, and you can come back, and we can read Sticky Branding.
I love it.
Okay, listen, we've spoken for quite a while now. Thanks for coming on the call, and we'll pick up those other actions going forward. Guys, I really appreciate your time, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks. Thanks.